amidst turbulent times and prevailing uncertainty in the global landscape, at a time when technology is disrupting sectors every few years and not just decades, when leadership needs to evolve to cater to the more evolved workforces, disruption is definitely the name of the game. The need for strong, resilient, and innovative leadership has never been more critical. Now, our next session aims to shed light on the role that leaders can play as a beacon in tumultuous times. How can leaders navigate through uncertainties and inspire their teams to overcome obstacles? What strategies can they employ to foster resilience and innovation in their organizations? Let's find out. To take this discussion forward, let me first welcome on stage Manu Balachandran, who's the Associate Editor at Forbes India. And joining him are our esteemed speakers for this session. We have Sunil Vachani, the Executive Chairman of Dixon Technology, Sasank Rishkant Sringa, who is the co-founder and CEO of Axio, Rishi Das, the co-founder and CEO of IndiCube. Please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming our esteemed speakers for this session.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome once again to Forbes India Leadership Awards 2024. When we sat down to decide on a topic for this panel discussion around leadership, there were numerous ideas, ranging from inclusivity to diversity to emotional intelligence, leadership during times of crisis, and ethical leadership, and so on. But nothing is more pertinent in today's world than leadership during times of disruption. Over the last 5 years, we've seen that with a raging pandemic, 2 successive wars, economic volatility, now supply chain disruptions, and of course, lately the advent of artificial intelligence. And who better than some of the top leaders in Indian business who are leading their companies to give us an insider view on how to sort of deal with leadership during times of distress and disruption. Sunil Vachani was busy scaling up his business even during COVID. He's the poster boy for electronics manufacturing in India today. And Dixon has had a phenomenal growth over the last few years. Rishi Das of IndiCube is an accidental entrepreneur, and his sector saw tremendous sort of struggle during COVID-19. Take, for instance, with WeWork in the US. And Shashank heads a company that operates in a segment that has seen frequent run-ins with regulator. On that note, let me begin this panel discussion by asking all 3 gentlemen today on what you see are some of the big disruptions facing your sector in particular and India in general. So I'll start with you, Shashank, and ask the others.
Sean, great to be here. Thanks for having me. I think we operate in the financial services or fintech space. And I think one of the biggest silent disruptions of the last few years has been the growth of digital public infrastructure in India, right? Most of us today would use UPI and would have an Aadhaar card. But what many of us wouldn't realize is the degree to which these pieces of infrastructure are changing the playing field. Because effectively what you have today is a system, I call it Aadhaar, that has given digital identity to billions of people. On top of that, we now have a payment system, UPI, where people can move money without any friction. And now, in addition to this, we have a set of new innovations, which I loosely call the account aggregator ecosystem, where effectively every consumer owns their data and can take it where they go. And so what these 3 things have done is create an environment where customers can literally take their business to the provider that's able to give them the best product or service. And that's going to create a huge amount of competition, but it's also going to create an environment where customer is king. And we heard Uday talking earlier about customer experience. But, much as we'd like to pat ourselves on the back as the private sector, I think the public sector has actually changed the game by creating the best digital public infrastructure for financial services that we see anywhere in the world today. And I think we're just starting to see the effects of this.
Mr. Vachani, what are your thoughts?
So, I recall the time that we were going for our road shows at the time of IPO. And I think the first question that a lot of investors asked that, is this sector, the electronic manufacturing services sector, is it prone to a lot of disruptions? And I think my honest answer was that, the technology in our sector, in the ICT sector, has changed a lot. So if you look at, let's say, LED televisions as a category, right? We moved from a CRT television to, a plasma television, then to an LED, and now to OLED, and maybe something to follow next. So while these technologies changed, the manufacturing setup did not have to, undergo a major transformation. So I think the answer is that I think this sector of electronic manufacturing and services is not really prone to disruptions. But I think what's going to change, and I think it's very important for any leader, to process that I think the time has come to embrace digital transformation. Industry 4.0 is here to stay. And, honestly, when I visit some of the factories, our own factories, where we have adopted, strategies on digital transformation, I really wonder that, how did we manage without all these softwares and the MES in place? So I think the future is going to be about Industry 4.0. It's going to be about digital transformation. We will be looking at, a lot of companies will be looking at rolling out MES, manufacturing excellence systems across their factories. So I think that's the big fundamental change that's going to happen as far as manufacturing sector is concerned.
Rishi, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Manu. As you can imagine, the workspace sector is one of the most disrupted sectors. And when COVID happened, the first question was that, will people ever require offices? From there, I think we have moved to a place where a generation like us, we went where work was. I think now work is going where people are. So we are moving to a very different concept of distributed offices. Workspaces are a lot more fungible now. People also come to office to work. That's a shift. Then if you look at other things, like the amount of focus that the top leadership has on office spaces is unprecedented. Because today, employees don't want to come to office. Employers want them to come to office. So as a result of that, focus on benefits and all is very, very unprecedented. The whole thing has moved to an experience. What used to be the office has become our office. A lot of growth is happening in the tier 2 cities. A lot of technology to enhance the experience is getting built in. Also, the pay-as-you-use model, the amount of rigidity which real estate in general and office spaces in particular had is completely gone. And if we compare with US, cities like Seattle or SFO are running at almost 40% vacancy levels. And there is an existential crisis in these cities, whether the cities will survive. But if you look at, on the contrary, in India, most of the urban centers are booming, growing. So I think clearly India has decoupled itself from the commercial real estate in developed markets. We have our own 1.0 going for us and going fairly strong. So in a lot of ways, disruption has happened and has helped the whole sector. And India has 50 cities where population is 1 million plus. China has 600 cities with 1 million plus population. So you can imagine the amount of office spaces, the distributed office spaces that we are likely to see in years to come.
Right. Mr. Vachani, Dixon kept scaling up its business, and particularly more so over the last 3-4 years, even during, peak COVID. And of course, that was evident even in the stock market. What do you think are some of the learnings that you've had, particularly during those times of disruption, that you intend to sort of carry forward in the years to come?
So I'm often asked this question that, what has really changed in the last 20 years? Because as I mentioned that as a country and as an industry, we've really come a very, very long way. And I think the biggest change, according to me, that has happened is the change in the mindset. So 20 years back, when I remember visit, people in the bureaucracy, They used to say that you're just wasting your time. Electronic hardware manufacturing is not going to happen in the country. Our strength lies in the software. And I think that mindset has changed, both in terms of the entrepreneurs and the bureaucracy. Now the belief is that India will be the next hub for manufacturing for the world. And I think going forward, we need another mindset change, that we need to start looking at global competitiveness. So gone are the days, when you could look at setting up a factory for catering to just 5% of the domestic market. You'll have to look at large scale. You'll have to look at factories where, I'm talking from our sector, where maybe 100,000 people are employed in one plant. They're living at the campus, right? And I think second point is that the focus of entrepreneurs will have to shift to design-led manufacturing. So India, of course, we'll have to focus on Make in India. But I think we'll have to emerge as a nation which is churning out products and solutions. So I think these are the two big changes that I see coming up.
But just to follow up to that, I mean, even then, there are obviously questions raised about, whether Vietnam is really competing with India, and of course, Vietnam competing with India.
Sorry,
Vietnam.
Vietnam,
Yeah, and so many other South Asian countries. Do you really think India is at the perfect place now when it comes to manufacturing?
So, there is no doubt that when we looked at this whole China plus one strategy of, companies overseas, the real benefit right now has gone to Vietnam rather than India. But I think the next 25, 50 years belong to India, right? And I think the reasons are obvious. We have a very large domestic market. The penetration levels of some of the products that we produce are extremely low, right? I'm sure you know that hardly, let's say, 15% of the people own a product like air conditioner, washing machine, right? So it's going to be a very, very large domestic market, and it's a big advantage. Our labor costs, of course, are much lower. Our productivity is as good as compared to, let's say, any other country, right? So I definitely believe that the next 25, 50 years belong to India, and it's just a matter of time that India emerges as the next hub for manufacturing for the world.
Right. Shashank, while the fintech sector is obviously booming, and of course, I mean, there's been crazy amount of disruptions there. You've also had some sort of run-ins with the regulator. Now, how do you sort of deal with disruptions that come from a regulatory point of view? And have you faced any so far?
So, we made the choice to be regulated from day one. And in hindsight, there were times where we grew slower, but I'm grateful for that. Because unlike any other sector in tech, finance has risk and it has compliance. And the problem with this credo of, move fast and break things is when you break things in financial services, you die. And one of my learnings from the last few years is half the job in building financial services in India is not dying, right? If you survive, you have a bright future ahead of you. And I think there are two key learnings there. The first is around this idea of risk and sometimes slowing down to be able to go faster in the long run. And I think that balance with what we heard earlier about risk management and technology and being able to shift gears depending on the macro environment has been crucial. I think the second has been compliance. Right? And it's compliance, unlike risk, is binary. You either do it or you don't, and if you don't, very quickly things will catch up with you. And I think there what we found is compliance is one of those things where you either put it into the DNA of your organization early on or it becomes impossible. And the benefits with having it early on is you just tend to be a little more conservative in your thought process. And if that mindset exists, top to bottom, then when there are moments of regulatory disruption or tightening, one's organization tends to be able to weather that storm. Correspondingly, if you haven't prioritized compliance, it's very hard. It's not a switch that you can flip.
No, that's a fascinating point. So, you mentioned you'll be conservative if you do that. Now, with so much investor money floating around, would that put you in a sort of a spot if that is the case?
It's really hard. right? And so this is a business, I think, fintech, where you constantly have to explain to people why you're not growing as fast as they wish. And after a while, I think that's actually a skill in running this business, right? And you're always managing two different constituents, because your debt providers, and I see some of them in this room, want you to be cautious, conservative, thoughtful, slow. Your equity providers are looking for returns. The magic happens when these two expectations are kept in balance. That's a hard thing to do. But fortunately, I think in the last couple of years, the overall ethos of entrepreneurship in India is starting to come back to a healthier normal. I think ideas like, being compliant, growing profitably, slowing down when it's smart to do so, are becoming a little more mainstream and a little more accepted. And that makes it easier to navigate these cycles as a founder.
Right. Rishi, let me bring you back here. I mean, you're in a sector that saw, even during COVID-19, co-working space, nobody really knew what was the future. What did you tell your team, and how did you sort of keep going during those times? And now I know you're profitable, you're back in the green. So how did you sort of go through that particular period?
So, as I said, at the beginning, it was about staying calm. That was the first thing, because first 4, 5, 6 months, you don't know what is happening and where are you headed. The other thing, somewhere the deep belief was there that we will prevail. That was at one side. The other was being paranoid when it comes to executing as if there is no tomorrow. So it became a bit of a schizophrenic situation, and you have to very seamlessly move from one state to the other, maintain your emotional fortitude and fluency all the while. And somewhere we were able to convince our people that there is a bigger picture awaiting to come, where India will be the largest commercial real estate market. Like if you look at like Bangalore, absorbed 56 million square feet of space between 2013 and 18. Shanghai absorbed 28 million. So Bangalore is the largest absorber of commercial real estate in the world as a city. And there's only one Bangalore in the world. So as a result of that, we were very convinced, and I was able to convince our team that the 1.0 has to come out of India, and we are on that task, and let's not lose heart and just be focused. We never let the unit economics deteriorate. And last but most important, ensure that our core values, doing more with less, being fungible, flexible, all that is something, being ethical, transparent, is what we followed. And that allowed us to treat the course.
Mr. Bachani, over the last few months and last few years, there's been a lot of chatter about artificial intelligence, right? About artificial intelligence. How do you see the role of artificial intelligence when it comes to manufacturing and in the next decade?
Yeah, as I mentioned, you see, it's the part of the Industry 4.0 initiatives, right? And I think a time has come that all of us embrace this, because I think, this is going to be the factory of the future. And I think it's very important that we have factories where the machines are talking to each other. There's a lot of data, with the management. So I think that's, it's going to happen in future. And I see artificial intelligence playing a very, very big role as far as manufacturing is concerned, especially on the MES side.
Right. Shashank, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence and particularly in fintech?
I'm tempted to say it's a bit overhyped right now. But I think it's one of those things where we'll overestimate its impact in the short run, but underestimate it in the long run. I think right now, AI is a lot about automation in things like, decisioning, customer service, collections, etc. At the end of the day, the heart of risk management is making good decisions. And I think we've now seen for a while that well-trained machines consistently make better credit decisions than people, without a lot of the biases that have crept into traditional financial services. So as an industry, I think we have been using machine learning and AI for quite some time. But I think we're still a few years away from seeing AI go from, large language models and machine learning on large quantitative data sets to actually being able to bring things like judgment, flair, the ability to make life and death decisions in a business context. I think when that tipping point happens, financial services is in for a ride.
Right. And how much of a, pace is the fintech revolution happening in India today?
Happening
How
where?
quickly is the fintech revolution happening in India today?
I mean, how many of you last went to a bank branch? Right? I think financial services, which is essentially what fintech really is, has already changed. I think almost everyone today is buying a financial services product or service digitally in some shape or form. What I think is about to change more fundamentally is the degree to which financial services is wired into every aspect of our ecosystem, right? I think traditionally FS kind of existed as a monolith, right? People went to a branch. Over time, the branch became an app. But what is now starting to happen is this idea of embedded finance, which is financial services appearing in every aspect of your life. On an e-commerce website when you're going to buy something. On a POS machine. In the middle of buying a movie ticket, right? Or in the process of managing a payroll software. Because at the end of the day, right, credit is fuel and it follows a structure of commerce. And I think what we are on the cusp of now is actually seeing financial services go away from being a standalone product or service, this idea of, I'm going to my bank, to your bank being available at every digital touch point of your economic life. And that will be revolutionary because it's only when credit grows at 2x GDP growth can we actually achieve this dream of becoming a 5 trillion plus economy over the next decade.
Right. Rishi, when we speak about disruptions today, it can also come from, from local, on a local factor, right? I mean, say for instance, it can be local factors also. Say for instance, Bangalore today is facing acute water shortage. Now, I was talking about Bangalore, and I was asking, disruption that can come, from local factors. Say for instance, Bangalore is now facing a water crisis. Now, how do you sort of, as business leaders, how do you tackle such, local disruptions?
Sure. So I think one thing which COVID taught all of us is the focus on environment, health and safety, and sustainability is a big thrust area. So that's something we started around the COVID time. And today I can say that like most of our buildings, we have been able to bring down our water consumption by anywhere from 50 to 80% by ensuring that we are recycling all the water, doing enough water harvesting and all that. So I think that is one area. Then if you look at power, for example, almost 40 to 50% reduction in power consumption purely on account of using the right set of IoTs and all over there. Waste management is a similar area. So most of the buildings and commercial real estate definitely will see a lot of impact of the environment happening. So all buildings have to look at resilience from that perspective. And what I can say with our experience in the last 3-4 years is sustainability is not a pipe dream at all. It is very much achievable. Most of the investments that we have made in sustainability, the return period is 1 year to 2 years. We are doing a lot of work with IIM Bangalore now on renovation of older properties because as city centers are getting revived through metro coming in, most urban centers in India lack good quality real estate. You can't be demolishing and creating a India Bull Center or a UBCT kind of building. They come once in 5 years. So the challenge will be that how the old real estate, which is almost 40, 50 year old, that is renovated and brought to life. In the last 3-4 years, we have almost renovated 2.5 million square feet of real estate, whose average life was more than 30 years. And a large part of these buildings are now platinum rated green buildings. So I think as part of business strategy, sustainability is not a choice. If we don't do it, what we are seeing in Bangalore, I think has happened in Chennai in the past, and we might see a Cape Town happening. But the solutions are within, with a little spend and a good amount of mind share. I think very much this can be addressed.
Right. On that note, we need to bring the session to a close, but I'll ask all three of you today, if you look at the next decade, what do you think is going to be that one big disruption that's going to sort of take place? Shashank, you first.
It's a very interesting question because I think predictions generally are wrong. But if I had to take a punt on this, I think the biggest disruption that could happen is the risk-taking ability of our capital markets. I think traditionally we have been a conservative economy, right? Uday spoke about this. That has meant a high reliance on more conservative mechanisms to raise financing, like bank debt. And that has in some ways raised the risks of entrepreneurship. What the US did very well in the last century is by creating these capital markets that can spread risks over a very large number of people, it created a culture of risk-taking and it created rewards for that. Failure was celebrated. I think we're starting to see the beginnings of that in India, but if you look at it, capital is still very concentrated. There are a handful of lenders, there are a handful of investors. Even in the public markets, you have a few investors that still move the needle, right? And I think if we're truly going to become an economy of risk takers, if we're going to become a nation of entrepreneurship, as we have always been through history, we're going to have to become a country that becomes more comfortable with risk. And the only way that's going to happen is if we create those mechanisms that can spread risk out over larger and larger and larger pools of investors. And if that disruption happens, I think the sky is the limit. And most importantly, it will, to some extent, release us from this dependence on foreign capital.
Absolutely. Rishi?
I believe the climate crisis and the jobs as we know them today, I think that is up for massive change. I see a massive job crisis. And I can say this because I'm the co-founder of another company called CareerNet, which is the largest recruitment company in India. We do 100,000 placements. So today, what you are seeing in the IT sector is not slowdown. It is all AI eating up the jobs. And very systematically it is happening. So I think that will be the biggest crisis. IT bailed us out in the last 2 decades as far as white-collar jobs were concerned. I don't know in the next 2 decades what kind of white-collar jobs we are going to add, which will bail out as a nation.
Mr. Vachani?
Yeah, I think, in our industry, we've seen that so far, electronics has been, I think, like a vertical. But I think going forward, what we'll see that electronics will touch almost every segment of your life, whether it's medical electronics, whether it's your automotive. So I think that's going to be the big disruption. And as far as I mentioned, as far as manufacturing is concerned, the real format, the change is going to be mega factories, connected factories, and digitally transformed factories.
Fascinating times ahead. On that note, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this panel today. A big round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.